Thank you, Joe. When Joe asked, said they were going to do the reading this year, I said I would go back to my Huff collection, and this is what it looks like. I don't think this is actually all of it. And all of us who knew Huff have a stack like this at home, and it's great. I started reading it, and I was gonna read a poem of my own, or something of my own. I had done a book with Huff called the Hennessy Papers at one point, and I was going to read something from that. But that's prose, and I don't want to sully the evening with prose. So I think I'm just going to read some Huff. But I wanted to also mention that Joe was talking about when he and Huff would go and read poems to the guys at the state hospital, and Huff has a great poem called Joe Hoppy Volunteer. But I think I read this last time, so I'm not going to read it this time. But it's such a great poem, But Larry Thorne scooped me. Out of all those poems, I thought, well, there's not very much of a chance that we picked the same poem, but Child was one of the poems I was going to read, so I got to stand in for that. So I thought I would share a couple things that I think are kind of representative of the kind of strains that are in Huff's poetry. Starting with, let me start with one of his poems. Well, actually, I'm going to start with this one. He was a nomad and a wanderer. He had a great collection called The Wander Years, and a great poem in there called Nomad. That long drive through Palmetto country from Fort Myers to the east coast of Florida, small sleepy towns the tourists never saw, stop at roadside A&W root beer stand for hot dog and frosted mug, sweet all the way down to your soul, driving on, curling past the big lake Okeechobee, Indian Sound, the road a dream of boat shops and fruit stands in distance. People stopped on the roadside for fruit and gas and sunlight, gliding on, transient, dreamer, not a part of anything but the road, passing home after home, none your own. He always liked to write these poems about people that he knew, and I thought this one was really good for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's representative of these kinds of poems that he wrote, and the Brenda name tag one that I think that you read was similar. Diminishment. Years after I first knew him, my friend Joe Cruz, whom I worked with at the Tower Restaurant, was robbed and shot one night walking home from work. He never completely recovered, and overnight became a small man. Have you ever seen that happen? Have you ever seen someone big and hardy and outgoing get sick or has an accident and suddenly becomes small and fragile? I almost didn't recognize him when I saw him again years later. By then he was working at another place, the Viking Cafe. And I saw him one morning standing out front smoking a cigarette. His teeth had gotten worse over the years, and two of the front ones were missing. But it wasn't that bothered me. What bothered me was he had shrunk. And where before he had looked straight at you, now his eyes looked down and off to the side, as though he questioned his right to be there at all. It made me sad. It was as though death had touched him, then changed its mind, and left him here to wait. And that's what he was doing. Joe Cruz, once big, warm, and boisterous, was standing in front of the Viking Cafe, smoking a cigarette and waiting for death, and looking very small. I really like that poem. I just want to mention a couple of things about that poem. First of all, reading these poems, there's so many places that Huff mentions, and in there he mentions the Tower restaurant and the Viking Cafe that are gone from Austin. So it's really interesting to hear that litany of things. The other thing is that's sort of, it seems to me, kind of what happened with Huff. He was he was much changed after his illness in 1978, those of you who knew him. And he was sort of diminished in some ways, though, in his creativity, obviously not. Then I wanted to read one that represents to me a kind of poem that Huff did, where he could be very concrete and very, very real, but at times he could be quite ethereal as well. Summer of Blue Castles. Summer of Blue Castles, on an island of morning, there was a lady, small as me, who wove her hair beneath a sunlight tree. It was brown and long beneath the shining gold branches, and we danced and touched very lightly while we waited to be free and older and come off the island of morning into the bright world with all its spangled expectations. I don't remember the rest. There was rain like silver and a boat painted black with a high, high hull and a dungeon inside where we waited and waited till they flung us ashore in a night black as cinders, and I don't remember. And then one more I'm going to read. I do think I might have read this last time, but it's my favorite. It's like my favorite Huff poem, so I have to share it with you again. It's from Working on My Death Chant, and it's Deep Fried. Eating fried chicken in the heart of New Mexico didn't seem appropriate somehow, but we were hypnotized by this shining metal cooker with the pipes and the pressure gauges sticking out of it and the great ratchet that locked the top down. And besides, Jan, who loved fried chicken, wouldn't budge once we found it, so we bought a large box and took it back to our Spanish Mission motel on the outskirts of Santa Fe with its rancho furniture and concrete block adobe walls, and sat on the porch in the broad New Mexican dusk, watching the sky go technicolor while we ate, our eyes ravaged. And the inside was sweet and succulent, and the outside crisp, and I declare to my soul it was the very essence of fried chicken, and one of the minor miracles of my life to discover it there on the outskirts of Santa Fe. But then Jan always had a nose for fried chicken and managed to discover it almost at will in the strangest places, traveling across 15,000 miles of the United States and Canada, but none quite so good as that. And so this is what you would call a sort of deep fried memory, which is probably why it lasted so long, 15 years to be exact, and surfaced almost unchanged, which is more than I can say for Jan and me.
Thank you.